Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're going to be digging into some fascinating research on large language models.
LLM.
LLMs, right? You know, those things that are powering everything from chatbots to, even like research these days.
That's right, yeah.
And it's kind of a crazy idea to think about, training an AI using data that was created by another AI.
Yeah, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. Like what could go wrong there?
Yeah, exactly. And that's where this idea of preference leakage comes in.
Okay, preference leakage. Now, this is something that researchers at Arizona State University and a couple of other institutions have been looking into.
Yeah, and it's a problem that could have some pretty serious consequences,
Yeah.
potentially affecting anything from, those chatbot competitions to even the integrity of some research results.
Yeah, so like, are we talking about, AI judges basically giving preference to certain outputs?
Exactly.
Like maybe a certain style of writing or something like that?
Yeah, yeah, basically like if the AI is judging, it might have a preference for a certain way of doing things.
So that's kind of scary. So we've got some really interesting research here we're going to be diving into today. You sent me this whole stack of articles and notes.
Yeah, a lot of stuff to go through.
Yeah, and so we're looking at the original research paper that kind of uncovered this whole preference leakage thing, right?
Yeah, and then some expert analysis and just commentary around the whole thing.
Okay, cool. So this preference leakage thing, it kind of reminds me of, we've talked about data leakage before. Is it kind of like that?
Yeah, you're making a good connection there. Data leakage is like if you accidentally gave a student the answers to a test beforehand.
Right,
That
right.
totally ruins the whole evaluation.
You can't really judge them fairly after that.
Exactly. Preference leakage is similar, but it's less about, the literal answers and more about picking up biases.
Okay, so inheriting biases. I like that.
Yeah, so it's like imagine you've got this, LLM teacher and it's learned to favor certain writing styles.
Oh, okay, so it's got its own quirks.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's student AI, it's going to pick up on those preferences just through the training data.
Oh, so it's not that the student is like intentionally cheating. It's just been taught this particular way.
Yeah, it's just been trained to write in a way that its teacher likes.
So then when that AI is evaluated, it might get a higher score, not because it's better, but because it just aligns with what the judging AI prefers.
Exactly, exactly.
Wow. Okay, so how widespread is this problem? Like, did they find that preference leakage is a pretty common thing?
So they tested out a bunch of different LLM pairs
Okay.
using these popular benchmarks like Alpha-Vol and Arena Hard. And unfortunately, yeah, they found this preference leakage in most of the pairs they looked at.
So it's not like a one-off thing?
No, it
Uh,
seems like it could be, baked into a lot of these AI systems that we're using.
yeah, like it's ingrained in the whole process.
And here's the thing. They also found that it was even worse in certain situations.
Okay, so like what kind of situation?
Well, for example, like when the AI models that were competing had really similar performance levels.
So they're both kind of on the same playing field.
Yeah, exactly.
Hmm.
And that's when those subtle biases, they really become the deciding factor.
Oh, so it tips the scales.
Exactly. It's like inheriting your family's like prized antique,
Oh, I like this.
but then discovering it's also cursed,
Mm.
you know? And then another thing they found was the larger, more complex these student models were,
So the bigger the brain.
the more susceptible they were to this leakage.
Oh, so it's like they're better at soaking up all that information, but also the biases.
Exactly. It's like they're just better at absorbing all those patterns, good or bad,
So the more advanced the AI is, the more likely it is to kind of pick up on these subtle things.
unfortunately. Yeah.
That's interesting. So different LLMs had different levels of bias, right?
Right. So some of them were much leakier than others.
Yeah. So some are just giving off more bias than others.
Yeah. And Gemini 1.5, for example, was a particularly strong influencer.
Really?
Yeah. They noticed that student AIs trained on Gemini-generated text, they tended to overuse certain adverbs, which is a quirk that Gemini itself has.
Oh, wow. So it really was passing down its own little quirks.
Yeah, it's like passing down those bad habits.
That's really fascinating. So this kind of leads to a big question, right? Like, could these LLMs actually be recognizing the work of their student AIs and intentionally giving them higher scores?
Right, like, are they playing favorites?
Yeah, are they rigging the game? So they wanted to find out if the LLMs could actually recognize their own creations, and if so, were they consciously giving them an advantage?
Yeah, fascinating question, right? So it turns out they weren't really great at recognizing their own creations.
So they couldn't tell, like, oh, this is my AI's work.
Not really.
Yeah.
But even though they couldn't consciously pick it out, the analysis showed that there were still these patterns of style and format being passed down.
Oh, interesting. So, like, it's not intentional, but it's still happening.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like imagine a student picking up their teacher's accent.
Oh, I see. So it's not like they're trying to copy, it's just this unconscious influence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Right, because it's not malicious, but it's still a problem.
Exactly, because now you've got this situation where the student's work might be judged favorably, but it's not actually because they're better. It's just because they've kind of inherited this style.
It's like they've got this unfair advantage.
Yeah, precisely. And this leads to a really important question. How does this preference leakage affect different types of tasks?
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Like, does it impact everything equally?
So it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of problem.
Okay, so tell me more about that. Like, what did the researchers find?
Well, for example, they found that objective questions, like math problems,
Right, where there's a clear right answer.
exactly, those were less susceptible to this leakage.
Okay, that makes sense. Because the answer's the answer no matter who came up with it.
Exactly. You can't really argue with 2 plus 2 equal 4.
Right. But what about the more subjective stuff?
Ah, well, that's where it gets really interesting.
I have a feeling you're going to tell me it's worse with the subjective tasks.
You got it. So things like writing or even programming.
Where style matters more.
Yeah, exactly. They found much stronger leakage in those areas.
Okay, because there's more room for interpretation, and so those inherited preferences really come into play.
Precisely. The AI judging might favor a certain way of writing, even if another approach is just as valid.
So it's not just about the quality of the work, it's about whether it fits the mold.
Exactly. And this raises a whole bunch of concerns.
Yeah, because we've been talking about these AI competitions, but this has real-world implications too, right?
Absolutely. This isn't just some theoretical problem limited to a lab somewhere.
Right, like this could affect real people.
Exactly. Think about things like loan applications.
Oh, wow, okay.
Imagine an AI that's been trained on data that subtly favors certain spending habits.
So, like, if you don't fit the mold, you might get rejected.
Exactly. Even if you're a good candidate on paper, the AI might unfairly deny you because your habits don't align with its learned preferences.
So it's not just about who wins an AI writing contest, it's about people's livelihoods.
Precisely. And it goes even beyond financial decisions.
Yeah.
Imagine things like scientific research.
Oh, yeah, where the AI is analyzing the data.
Exactly. If that AI has inherited a preference for certain methodologies,
The results could be skewed.
exactly, you could end up with flawed findings all because of this hidden bias.
It really is like garbage in, garbage out. But in this case, it's more like bias in, bias out.
Exactly. And it forces us to confront something uncomfortable. A lot of this AI is being trained on human-generated data.
Which is full of biases.
Exactly. So it's almost inevitable that the AI is going to inherit those biases, especially when we don't even fully understand how they're learning.
It's like looking in a distorted mirror. We're seeing our own biases reflected back at us, but amplified.
That's a great way to put it. So then the question becomes, how do we fix this? How do we build AI that's actually objective and trustworthy?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Like, what are some of the solutions here?
Well, the researchers suggest a few things. First, we need to be a lot more aware of this preference leakage problem.
So, like, acknowledge that it exists.
Exactly. And if we're going to use LLMs for important tasks, especially things that affect people's lives.
Right, like loans or healthcare.
Yeah, we need to be extremely cautious.
Almost like a warning label. May cause unintended biases.
Right. We also need to develop better ways to actually detect and mitigate these biases.
So like tools that can spot these hidden preferences.
Exactly. And maybe that means analyzing the training data more carefully
Oh.
or using multiple LLMs to evaluate performance.
So like a checks and balances system?
Exactly. You don't want one AI to have all the power.
Right, because then its biases become the only biases that matter.
Exactly. And maybe most importantly, we need a lot more transparency about how these systems are being built.
Especially the data they're trained on.
Yeah, that's crucial. If we don't know what went into the AI, how can we trust its outputs?
It's like a recipe. If you don't know the ingredients, you can't really judge the final dish.
Exactly. It's not just about fixing the code, it's about fixing the systems that create the code and acknowledging that AI inherits the biases of its creators.
It's a much bigger challenge than just tweaking some algorithms.
Yeah, it's a societal challenge.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder, like, what does this all mean for the idea of AI sentience?
Oh, that's interesting. We hear a lot about AI becoming conscious, but if it's so easily influenced by our biases, does that make it more or less likely to be truly independent?
It's a really fascinating question.
Mhm.
Some people argue that this susceptibility to bias actually reinforces the idea that AI is just a reflection of us.
Like a parrot mimicking human speech.
Exactly. It can sound impressive, but it's not really thinking for itself.
It's just repeating what it's heard.
Right. But then other people argue that this very malleability is what makes AI so powerful.
Because we can shape it.
Exactly. And potentially dangerous.
Hmm.
If we're not careful, we could end up with AI that reflect our worst qualities.
But if we're thoughtful, maybe we can instill positive values, ethical
Right.
principles.
We could create AI that's not just intelligent, but also compassionate and just.
It's like shaping a young mind,
Yeah.
guiding it towards making good choices.
Exactly. But the key is to do it thoughtfully, without just replicating our own biases.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
We need to recognize both the potential for harm and the potential for good.
And make conscious choices about how we develop and use these technologies.
So it's not some sci-fi scenario where rogue AI takes over the world. It's about the real ways these systems are shaping our lives right now.
And how they reflect our own values back to us.
We can just be passive consumers of AI.
We need to be informed, critical, and demand transparency from the people who are building these systems.
We need to be active participants in this conversation. And speaking of active participation, there's one more aspect of this I want to touch on. We've been talking about these big things like, loan applications and research. But this whole preference leakage thing, it affects other areas too, right?
Oh, definitely, yeah. One area where it could have a huge impact is in those chatbot competitions.
Oh, yeah, those are getting pretty popular.
Yeah, everybody wants to build, the most amazing, helpful chatbot.
And there's a lot of money at stake too, right?
Exactly.
So I can see how that would be a problem. Like if the judges are trained on data that's, biased from other AIs.
Exactly. It's like, imagine you've got this talent show, right?
Okay.
And the judges, they secretly have a preference for a certain style of performance.
So even if someone's super talented, they might not win if they don't fit that mold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's not really fair to the other contestants.
No, not at all.
And, those competitions, they really influence which chatbots get funding and attention.
Oh, for sure. It's like a proving ground.
Yeah. So if those results are being skewed because of preference
It's
leakage,
going to stifle innovation.
yeah, exactly. We might end up with this chatbot landscape that's really, less creative, less diverse.
Less useful for us, the users.
Exactly. So it all comes back to transparency, right? We need to know where these AI judges are coming from, what data they were trained on, and what kind of biases they might have.
Yeah, it's like a family tree for AI.
I like that analogy.
But instead of tracing, ancestry.
Tracing bias.
Yeah. So if we can make that transparent, maybe users can make better choices about which AIs to trust and use.
Exactly. It's about giving people the tools to be critical and understand the limitations of AI.
Yeah, we can't just blindly trust every chatbot that pops up.
Nope, we need to ask questions.
Yeah.
So we've talked about a lot today. What's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that AI, it's not magic, it's a tool. And like any tool, it reflects the values and biases of the people who made it. So as AI gets more powerful and integrated into our lives, we need to be really aware of how it's being shaped and what that means for all of us.
Yeah, this research on preference leakage, it's just the tip of the iceberg, really.
It shows us just how complex these challenges are as AI evolves.
Definitely. And it underscores the need for all of us to be informed and engaged.
We can't just sit back and let AI happen to us.
We need to be active participants in shaping its development.
We need to demand transparency and accountability from the people building these systems.
And remember, AI is not some magical solution. It's a reflection of us.
And we need to make sure that reflection is something we can all be proud of.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning me today on The Deep Dive.
My pleasure.
And until next time, stay curious, everyone.